The story of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell is a shit show. How could it possibly be boring? Well, Lifetime found a way. Welcome to Netflix and Kill, my playlist that looks at movies and miniseries based on true crimes and lays them out, starts with a Y incision, and performs a full forensic autopsy. On the slab today, Doomsday Mom, the Lori Vallow Story. And yes, you have to say it in that exact tone of voice. But before we dig into it, I really want to welcome back all my viewers and welcome to anyone new. And I want to give a big thank you to all my subscribers too. Now, hand me a scalpel. Honestly, this is the first Lifetime original movie I've ever watched. Like a lot of people, I only knew about them through their reputation.
You're watching Lifetime, television for women, white women.
So I was expecting it to be so bad it was funny, like watching a B horror movie. Just as many people die, but nobody comes back as anything. So let's start with what I will generously refer to as the plot of this movie. It opens in Kauai, January 26, 2020, in a reenactment of that scene where Lori and Chad are being questioned by reporter Nate Eaton, and they're refusing to give any kind of comment about the whereabouts of Tylee and JJ. Then it cuts to a reenactment of a media interview with somebody saying that Lori was such a good mom. Then we have a flashback to the happy family, complete with stilted artificial dialogue. In this scene, Tylee's sad because her boyfriend was caught at the movies with another girl, and Lori's solution to comfort her is to quote a bunch of scriptures at her. I think this is supposed to show how very religious or pious that Lori is, but all I really got out of it was that she doesn't really listen to her daughter. In this scene, we do see Alex Cock, but he's just kind of lurking around in the background. Kay and Larry Woodcock do show up, but we don't get any kind of introduction or even their names, really. There's also this other apparently random couple there. When I rewatched it, I did hear that they mentioned their names, Brandon and Lainey. So I guess these are supposed to be the Boudreauxes, whatever. I'm not sure why they're here, particularly in this opening establishing scene. That's usually when you introduce your main characters and kind of show us a little bit about them. We learn nothing about any of these people here other than Lori is really religious and the family seems happy. And already shit is starting to work my nerves. Like, you mean to tell me they couldn't find a thick actor to play Tylee? It's like fat people aren't allowed to exist in Hollywood. But yet, in a later scene, they do the exact opposite. But we'll come back to that later. So then it cuts to another recreation of a media interview, this time with Kay and Larry Woodcock. I'm not necessarily opposed to using this device of reenacting media interviews. It can help to provide some exposition. But these filmmakers didn't really use it very well. They use the voiceovers from these interviews over scenes where they're not really needed. Like this particular one is pretty good, but it kind of makes the previous one unnecessary. Like, how many people do we need to tell us that Lori was a really good mom? We need to see her being a good mom, but of course we don't. And I kind of suspect that's maybe because she wasn't actually that good of a mom, but that's just speculation. So then we cut to Lori finding one of Chad's books at a yard sale, which honestly is probably the best place for them. The scene also kind of shows us how JJ is difficult and that Tylee apparently has better parenting skills than her mother. So back at home, she's only a couple of pages in and already flipping her shit about Chad's prophecies. There's no buildup, it's just 0 to 60 right away, which pretty much sums up this entire movie. Now we're at this preppers convention where Lori meets Melanie Gibb, and it looks like the saddest flea market ever. The filmmakers clearly have no idea who these people are or what they're about. It definitely wouldn't have just a bunch of crappy hand-painted signs like they're at some third grade science fair. There would be way more nutcases selling guns, ammo, anti-government bumper stickers, and sketchy nutritional supplements. And for fuck's sake, they would know the difference between a puffball and a death cap mushroom. Like, this is an actual scene that they had to pay that actor scale for, I'm assuming. The mushrooms he's holding are just plain old button mushrooms like you buy at the grocery store, which can sort of look like death cap mushrooms, but neither one of them look anything like puffballs. Puffballs are literally balls. They don't have any gills. And I know that seems like a really nitpicky thing to expect them to go into this level of research for a throwaway scene, but why was this scene even here? This could have just been in the background with, an actual printed sign saying something like, "Know your mushrooms," or something clever like that, and just have him sort of talking, where you can't hear him, and we would get the point. Oh, here's some guy teaching people how to identify mushrooms. A good set designer could have used banners and signs and props to show a lot more about what's going on here and who these people are. But absolutely no one in this crew was paid anywhere close to enough to give even a fraction of a shit about this movie. And this scene about these preppers is actually pretty important to the story, unlike so many other scenes we're forced to endure. So anyway, this is where Lori becomes insta-friends with Melanie Gibb. Now, Melanie Gibb did say that when they met there, they bonded really quickly over their shared religion and the fact that they both have autistic kids. So this wasn't too terrible from an accuracy standpoint. But as also a mom of an autistic son, this one line just flew all over me. When Lori is confiding in Melanie about her struggles with JJ, Melanie tells her to just pray more. Like, don't get him occupational therapy. Don't try and find a support group for parents of autistic children. No, just pray more. So then we do get a scene of her praying. This time, I guess it's to show the contentious relationship between her and her ex, Joseph Ryan. But A, Joseph doesn't really have anything to do with the story, and B, we don't know why she's so upset with him in the first place. So the next thing we see is a reenactment of that comedy sketch that Alex did, where in real life he pretty much confessed to killing Joseph Ryan. And it opens with a voiceover from Kay just saying Alex is close, very close with his sister, which isn't really necessary. It doesn't really give us any information. And it's sort of out of sequence, like a lot of things in this movie. The comedy routine should come after Joseph dies, but that would just make too much sense. In this scene, Alex is way too handsy with his own sister. He asks her what's bothering her while they drink what I can only assume is water since they're Mormons, right? And cut before Lori actually says what it is that's bothering her. I honestly don't know what they're trying to do with this scene. I think it was just an excuse to include that comedy club reenactment. Anyway, now we get more of Lori praying, this time for Joseph to be gone. And in the very next scene, we get the news that he is in fact dead. No explanation either for why he's dead or why it's being included in this story. Like, are they trying to say that Lori actually does have the power to make people die with her prayers? Or if they're trying to suggest that Alex actually did it, they did a piss poor job of it. Instead of that vapid conversation in the comedy club, you could have Alex say something about why he's willing to do anything for her, or how Lori is saying she really wants Joseph out of the way. As it is, it just makes no sense. So then Melanie takes Lori to go see Chad, where he's giving this super basic slideshow about the end of the world. This could have been a perfect place to flesh out more about what his beliefs are, but that would require research, which apparently these filmmakers are allergic to. Instead, they go with yet another unnecessary voiceover. They do a good job of showing the instant attraction between Lori and Chad. But of course, they kind of spoil it with more voiceover we don't need. It shows how Chad instantly starts wooing her and telling her how special she is. This is done with several scenes of them walking together that night, where he's telling her all this stuff about how she's part of the 144,000 elite, that she's an ancient and powerful being, and that they've been married many times before, and then the whole zombie thing. I wish these filmmakers understood what a montage is. And just as an aside, is it okay for her to be wearing a dress that's this tight and this short? I'm just asking. Here it looks like they immediately start having an affair, which is not true. Lori had been standing him for a while, but it took a little longer and more of him basically manipulating her before she completely falls under his spell. Also, they kind of left out the fact that Chad was gathering sort of a little cult of followers around him, how he was claiming to be a prophet and heal people and shit. I think this aspect of it, as Chad being an egomaniacal wannabe cult leader, is really important to everything that happened. Anyway, later we have Chad telling Lori that he's had a vision of their spouses dying, and that another vision that Charles has gone dark. Without all the background about him and him thinking he's a prophet and all this other shit, it just kind of seems to come out of nowhere. And Lori looks incredibly gullible to just sort of instantly believe all this horse shit. Then we cut to Charles on the phone with, I guess, Kay and Larry. He's telling them how Lori's done all these crazy things, including draining his bank account and stealing his truck. Like, wait, what? Where the fuck did this come from? And why is this a phone call and not an actual scene? It's just so, like, out of the blue. We needed a scene or two or three showing Lori starting to believe that Charles was a zombie and to start acting crazy or something. But they just rammed this plot point in. No foreplay, no lube. Charles is barely in this movie at all, even though in real life, he was the first one to start ringing these alarm bells about Lori's increasingly disturbing and scary behavior. In fact, we now know that right before he was killed, he had called in some of Lori's relatives, including Alex, to stage a sort of intervention over this. Alex murdered him the day before that intervention was supposed to happen. Charles could have been the perfect window for the audience to see how Lori evolved from essentially a good, loving mom to, well, a serial killer. But apparently, these filmmakers are fundamentally unfamiliar with the concept of storytelling. So now we finally get a glimpse of Tammy Daybell. Now, granted, in real life, we don't know a whole lot about her, but we do know that she was in good shape. She was training for a marathon, so she was a runner. And we know she had short hair and wore glasses. Literally nothing about this actor, whose name is Jennifer Juniper Angeli, I'm not sure, looks like the real Tammy Daybell. It's almost like the writer learned, oh, she was in her 40s, and all he could think of was frumpy housewife. Next, Lori and Chad do some creative lying so he can come visit her while Charles is away on business. So I guess all the craziness that he was so worried about is okay now. I think this is just another weirdly out of sequence scene. Anyway, then we see Lori dancing with herself in an I'm so in love scene. I'm not really sure why this is even here. And that's what's so frustrating. The screenwriter has all these absolutely useless scenes that don't convey anything about the character or move the plot along, but then he doesn't include scenes that we would actually need to move the plot along or show us any kind of motivation. Like, Lori seemed totally happy and content in her marriage until the second she met Chad. Anyway, we have another random jump to the house where Alex is going to shoot Charles, and we get a reenactment of that body cam footage from that day. No explanation, no build-up. Then we have the pool party that she threw that night, but it's not really made clear that it was that night. It just looks like, oh, she had another pool party at some point, and it's introduced with, again, more completely unneeded voiceover. Then we get Lori trying to cash in on his life insurance policy, followed by more voiceover. She's freaking out about money now that Charles is dead. And the fact that she's acting like she's going to be out on the streets without him just shows how greedy or entitled that she is. She was bringing in about $7,000 in benefits for Tylee and JJ. But the filmmakers might not have known that yet, which just goes to show this movie was made too soon. Then we get another random scene with that couple from the beginning, the Boudreaux. She's telling him that Chad has told her that he has gone dark, so she's divorcing him. Like, knowing about the case, I kind of know who these people are and I have a vague idea of what's going on, but this has nothing to do with the main story and it is not explained at all in this movie. So next we do get some scenes where Lori is shown kind of starting to doubt Chad, which is good. And then we're shown that JJ might be a problem for them. And sure enough, Chad has a vision that the kids are zombies. She starts to see it when her and Tylee kind of get into an argument. And at last, a sequence of scenes showing some reasoning and motivation, at least somewhat. Next, we see the family at Yellowstone National Park in a recreation of that infamous last photo with Alex and the kids. I do like the way that they recreated some of the events and photographs that were all over the news about this case. But I feel like that's all they put any effort into. Like they thought just by recreating every single news story, that would equal good story. Then the camera shows Tylee literally disappearing. This drove me up a wall. Like, I understand that they don't want to show graphic violence against children, but this is just beyond lazy. It's almost insulting. But I guess if you have an intelligence that's capable of being insulted, you wouldn't be watching a Lifetime original movie. So after Tylee disappears, we get Chad sending that incriminating text to Tammy, which is kind of good. So next, we have this scene of Lori doing that podcast in her living room with more unnecessary voiceovers. Now, I'm not a podcaster, but I'm pretty sure you don't just do these things in your living room. And also, maybe get a sitter for your special needs kid while you're doing a podcast. Anyway, this is the scene where Lori apparently starts believing that JJ is indeed a zombie. And then she immediately pulls him out of school. Classic abuser move. More unnecessary interviews to explain shit that we already know. We have Lori and Chad planning their wedding. Then we're back with Kay and Larry and their super annoying fake Southern accents. So already they've been looking for him for weeks. Not that that was made clear at all. It's just another one of this film's signature time jumps. And Lori's excuse for not putting JJ on the phone is that he's really busy. What is she, his fucking secretary? He's an 8-year-old. And then we get a sequence that's this close to being good. We get Chad upping Tammy's life insurance policy. Then he's kneeling over her dead body. Then he's at her funeral, shoveling dirt into her grave, while Lori is getting her wedding ring in the mail. This was a really wasted opportunity to show a clear contrast between Chad ending Tammy and Lori getting all excited about beginning a relationship with Chad. But instead, they completely cock it up by shoehorning in a couple more random scenes of Chad's little Bible study group and then Alex shooting at Brandon Boudreaux. And also, I'd like to see this ring. It's kind of important since Lori had ordered it before Tammy died and she had been describing it to Chad. But they kind of keep it out of focus, almost like they're trying to blur it out to protect its identity. So then we get a recreation of the infamous wedding photos. Again, I think this is one thing the film did really well. And now, finally, an hour and a half into this movie, we finally meet some cops who are investigating this case. But they aren't introduced in any way. It's just one random factoid among many. Finally, we have Kay and Larry going to the cops, and the actor playing Kay is really working for that paycheck. This should have been the opening scene. This is how most of us learned about this case, was learning that Tylee and JJ were missing. And that's generally how these kinds of stories are told. You start with when the crime happens or when it gets reported, and then you reveal the backstory and move the plot along, either through the investigators or other people involved in the case. In this case, that would be the Woodcocks. They were instrumental in this case from the very beginning. They were the ones who were pushing the cops to investigate the children's disappearances, and they were the ones keeping it in the public eye for so long. But this movie almost treats the kids' murders like an afterthought, like just one more plot point to cram in there. So then Chad and Lori are shown lying to the cops, and then the cops searching Lori's apartment with more voiceover. And the cops discover that Lori has left after we've already seen her and Chad in Hawaii. And then there's this scene in the middle where it looks like they're back in Idaho. Again, I just don't understand what kind of timeline they were working from. Then we get a sex scene because apparently that's important. And in it, Lori is still wearing her bra. And this is just a pet peeve of mine, but it really, really bugs me to see sex scenes with women in their bras. And that's because, as the owner of a pair of myself, I cannot stand wearing bras. As soon as I'm through the door at the end of the day, that thing is off. I cannot imagine having sex with one on. Do women actually do this? Like, I can kind of see where, okay, the filmmakers didn't want to show nudity, but you can do that with strategic camera angles and sheets or whatever. I don't know. This is just a thing that bugs me. Sorry. Thankfully, the sex scene is interrupted by a pretty good reenactment of the phone conversation between Melanie Gibb and Lori. So now we're almost at the end of the movie, and it's kind of almost starting to get good. We get Alex's sudden death and the coroner's findings that it was natural causes. We get Kay and Larry's anguish over the kids. And this is really powerful. This should be the primary conflict of the story, but it's just kind of stuck onto the end here. So Lori's arrested for failing to produce the kids, and the detectives trace Alex's phone to Chad's property, and they find some Halloween decorations that are supposed to be human remains. And I will give them props for showing them accurately. Tylee's skull was in fact found inside a half-burnt bucket. Then they show the kids being buried through Alex's flashback, which, okay, Alex is dead by now, but also it feels pretty squirrely after they just showed the children disappearing earlier. Not to mention, it's also really unnecessary since we already saw the detectives trace his cell phone to Chad's property where they found the bodies. Anyway, it ends. The final scenes are Lori in prison, spouting off more batshittery about past lives. The actor gives the camera crazy eyes to show that maybe she's not really buying any of this and she's just kind of scheming. Anyway, it's a terrible way to end the movie, which is yet another reason why they should have waited until after the trials. But even if they didn't want to wait that long, they could have ended it with the two being arrested. At least that's kind of an ending or a conclusion. So anyway, I want to talk about the way that Lori was portrayed by this actor, Lauren Lee Smith. In an interview with TV Line, she said, "I took a deep dive into the whole story and I found it morbidly fascinating." I don't think you took a deep enough dive, honey, because there are plenty of photographs and footage of Lori Vallow, and in none of them does she look like the Xanax-coated Stepford wife you portrayed her as in this movie. When you look at the body cam footage of her when Charles was killed and in the police interrogation room, or in any of the news footage of her, she's always smirking and flipping her hair, talking over people, lying her narrow ass off. Even in her mugshot, she's got that insufferable smirk. She gives off major Karen energy. In that same interview, Smith said, "I found the character so surreal and hard to understand." Yeah, that checks out. You did not understand Lori Vallow. When actors say that they found a character hard to understand, that's a dead giveaway that they blew it. But I also have to agree with the girls on the We Saw the Devil podcast. It seems like Lifetime was trying to make Lori an insufferable narcissist at the very least, a sociopath at worst. They made her out to look like a sweet, innocent victim. And by the way, they did a really good deep dive into this movie. If you haven't listened to it yet, I'm going to put a link down in the description if you want to check it out. I don't think Lifetime did a very good job of portraying her this way, but I can definitely see where that might have been where they were aiming. As for Chad, not to defend Lori, but it did always kind of chat my ass the way that all the news coverage and this movie really focused on Lori as the Doomsday Mom, when Chad was clearly the leader of their little proto-cult. He was the one who published all those books, who claimed that he could have visions and heal people, who diagnosed people as being zombies, and declared himself a prophet. Supposedly he was kicked out of the LDS church for it. He was a major player in these crimes. He was the one who convinced Lori that her husband and then her children were zombies who needed to be killed. But none of that really comes through in this movie. Chad just kind of looks like a greasy character. As for Kay and Larry Woodcock, I feel really badly for them. I mean, not only did they have to go through losing their grandchildren in such a horrible way, but then in this movie, they're made out to look like caricatures. And I have to say, I think I can speak for all Southerners when I say that fake Southern accents are like fingernails on a chalkboard. It is so bad. As for Tylee and JJ, I'm agreeing with the We Saw the Devil gals again. It was really insulting the way these two kids were portrayed. They were the most important people in this whole story, and they're sort of just treated like any other plot point. And they made a really good point that the way they portrayed JJ's autism was not very accurate, really lazy, and just bad. And I do agree with that. But I will give the filmmakers a little bit of sympathy. It is hard enough working with child actors in the first place, just to portray a neurotypical character. To try and get a child actor to accurately portray someone on the autism spectrum, that's difficult to impossible. And honestly, this little actor didn't do such a terrible job. So I'm gonna give them a half a pass for that one. My diagnosis, it's a hot mess. The production value was really good. Clearly, they spent a lot of money on it, although I couldn't find a budget for the movie anywhere. The sound design, the set design, lighting, it all looked and sounded very professional. Now, I'm sure other people with more filmmaking experience could probably nitpick and find things wrong, but just as a lay viewer, so to speak, I thought it looked and sounded pretty darn good. Not a single time did I see a boom mic drop into a shot or a cardboard set piece wobble or fall over. All the plot points were mostly accurate. They did speed some things up, which is kind of normal for adapting things to a movie, but they also got a lot of things really out of sequence, which made it really hard to follow. But all that slick, polished production could not make up for the fact that there did not seem to be any actual writing involved with this movie. Like I said earlier, it's just a one event after another with barely anything connecting them. There's no sense of pacing or rising tension, just these jarring time jumps between events. There's little to no character development. We don't get anyone's motives, like why is Alex so devoted to Lori that he would kill for her? Why do either of them want the Boudreauxes dead? Why is anyone doing anything?
Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
So I looked up the writing credits, and it looks like the writer for this movie was Stephen Tolkien. According to IMDb, most of his credits are television films. Among his better-known films are crime dramas based on real events, such as Cleveland Abduction and The Craigslist Killer. Oof. I seriously hope they stop payment on that check because whatever they paid him, it was too much. You probably didn't need me to tell you this, but don't waste your time on this movie. I just wish Lifetime would use some of that budget to pay a real writer. Call me. So, did you watch Doomsday Mom? What did you think? And do you enjoy this deep dive into this movie? Do you have any suggestions for other movies you would like me to autopsy? As always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to help me make more nerdy content, you can support me on Patreon. The link is in the description. Till next time, Darklings.